My mother and my grandmother, many of the little quotes that people hear me talk about, like when you know better, do better, that comes from them.
Yes.
It comes from helping me to understand that even in the most challenging situations, there is a pathway forward, but people have to be willing to grow and evolve. And you've also got to be anchored to a set of principles.
Yeah.
And those principles will actually help you in those really challenging times. And they'll also buffer you when things are going well and everybody wants to pat you on the back. And if you're not careful, you will lose focus with what the goal is.
Super excited about talking to this cat, Mustafa Santiago Ali, man.
Yes.
Every time I say his name, I just want to say
he's a
MSA,
force.
Missa.
He's someone that
Yeah.
I find does this amazing job of connecting all of the injustices of the world.
He does.
And he kind of just, it's like this thread that he just pulls through all of them. Which I think is important, because no matter what, area that you're passionate about or what injustice you are fighting against in your everyday life or in the field of service, it all comes down to the root of what is causing all of them.
I love the fact that he talks about, environmental injustice, in particular as it applies to Black and brown communities, marginalized communities. And
I don't think we link that. We don't
we
link those
don't.
two. Yeah.
We don't. And it's, it's ironic to me because, it's like our indigenous brothers and sisters, whether they be in Africa or Latin America or, First Nations people in North America. They come from this long tradition of being stewards of the earth, right? But because of poverty and racial injustice, they live in spaces that are essentially kind of environmental polluting zones or environmental deserts. And he talks so profoundly, eloquently about that dilemma. And then he links it to historical traumas and injustices, And that's precisely the kind of work that he's doing. So and he's also got the coolest style in the world. I mean, Mustafa, the brother
he does.
is,
I don't think you could beat him. Anyone could beat him.
No,
in his style.
He's like the green thumb Dapper Dan.
He talks about he always brings grace to the table.
He does.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of grace. Got a lot of style, a lot of grace. Brother's got a lot of stuff happening, doesn't he?
Yeah, has a lot.
I mean, the hair is rocking,
wonderful
the cap.
stuff happening.
Yeah.
Makes him incredible.
The other part that is really cool is his emphasis on hope in the face of dealing with the things that he's dealing with,
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, man, because I'm thinking we're engaged in making our own contribution in the spaces that we're engaged in. You're very focused on, women's rights, justice for women, really creating space for women's voices to be heard, centering women's voices. I'm involved in some of that work too, and then also racial justice. And all of this, all of this work we both believe is for the betterment of the human family as a whole.
Yeah.
But this work is hard, and doing it, being engaged in it, giving it our heart and our soul, sometimes you can get really discouraged.
Yeah.
But he seems to possess this inner quality, this kind of
Optimism.
hopefulness and optimism that is so important to the work. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think that's really interesting because a lot of people look down on optimism.
Yeah.
There is this trend, I want to, dare I say, fashionable, to be very cynical and call yourself a realist and say, this is our reality.
Yeah.
One person, none of us can really do anything about it. We're just doomed. And I think one thing, when you look across the board of anyone that has ever made any type of meaningful change, they've had this optimism that everybody else would describe as utopian. But that's the only thing that can actually allow us to, the only thing that can give us the energy and the capacity to do something about it. So it's like that. It's the prime ingredient, but it's the very thing that is so difficult to have when you're in pain and when you're being oppressed, or when there's injustices that exist.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about talking to him. I'm excited because I feel like what I know of him and the way that he celebrates women, that you're going to get a lot of love and encouragement today. And I'm always happy to see my brilliant co-host get that kind of encouragement.
Oh, that's so sweet. This feeling is absolutely mutual.
Let's do it, man.
Okay.
All right, let's go. Come on.
Hello.
Yo, Mustafa, what's up,
Welcome.
man? How you doing, brother?
Oh, man. Blessed, busy, and thankful.
And welcome, man. Welcome to the show.
I know y'all killing it. So,
well, Nava's doing all the killing it. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to keep up, brother. We do what we must do. You know what I'm saying? So,
I understand. Let the sisters lead. No problem.
Got to, brother. Got to.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about that actually. Because you talk about the environment and the relationship it has with racial justice, and I would love to see the relationship it has to women and actually the oppression of women, and I think it does have a relationship. And we thought if anyone would know, then it's Mustafa would know.
Yeah.
Well, the first principle of the environmental justice movement is honoring Mother Earth, not Father Earth. Honoring Mother Earth. So we understand that all life comes from mothers, from females. So when you honor that, then you change the paradigm that many of our European brothers and sisters embraced over time, and not honoring women and actually creating a set of situations where subjugation was actually the foundation that they operated from. And then that translated over into policy and into a number of sets of actions that have been very destructive because there was no balance, there was no harmony. And when you don't have that, and when you're not honoring where life springs from, then you've actually set in motion a set of situations that lead to your own annihilation.
Wow.
So, you can't change history, but you can change what's happening in the present and the future.
You're talking about Mother Earth. It's got me thinking about mothers, man. It's got me thinking about, how women have supported my journey, throughout my life, man. And have ushered me in from one phase of my, development into the next. And, you're working, man. You got this platform, and this incredible platform where you're an advocate for environmental justice, for all of humanity, but particularly as it relates to marginalized populations. And you tie that into, human rights activism as a whole, how advocating for these marginalized populations, in essence, is advocating for everybody, which I think is a really profound insight that you bring to the table. Man, and as you've got this incredible platform, whether it be in the educational space, whether it be in the public advocacy space, man, I'm wondering, man, how you got here, brother. I mean, who were the women, man, that ushered you into this space, brother, that carried you from one stage in your development to the next, brother? And I'm wondering if you could share some of that.
Well, you got to start with my mother and my grandmother. Anybody who has ever heard me speak, that's the beginning of many of the pieces of information that I share with folks, how they helped me to have such a strong foundation. That doesn't take anything away from my father and my grandfathers, who were all incredible in their own right. But it was really my mother and my grandmother who really taught me a lot of lessons that then translated into life, translated into my work, and anchored me with a strong foundation. My mother and my grandmother, many of the little quotes that people hear me talk about, like when you know better, do better, that comes from them. Yes. It comes from helping me to understand that even in the most challenging situations, there is a pathway forward, but people have to be willing to grow and evolve. And you've also got to be anchored to a set of principles. Yeah. And those principles will actually help you in those really challenging times. And they'll also buffer you when things are going well and everybody wants to pat you on the back. And if you're not careful, you will lose focus with what the goal is. So I'm always thankful for them. They're just amazing. When you really go back, it was the women who actually were providing the leadership. They were providing the guidance. They were also providing the nurturing that was so necessary. And in many instances, they were also the ones that would hem you up if you began to slide. So I'm thankful to my mother and my grandmother for everything that they've taught me and the love that they gave me. I wouldn't be who I am without them.
I work with a foundation called the Mona Foundation, and it focuses on the education of girls around the world, because the idea is that if you educate a girl, you can solve a whole host of world problems. early pregnancies drop, and the GDP of a country rises, domestic violence in a country drops. The physical environment is actually better off when a woman is empowered or educated. When she's making money, when she starts a business, she uses that money a lot differently than a man does. She uses that money on her family, on the community. So maybe, it's interesting, this physical environment and the link between oppression and the health of our environment. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I hope that folks understand the value that women, girls, grandmothers bring in our society, our global society. When it's out of balance, everything is out of balance. So, lots of times folks will see, a couple of men who are associated with the environmental justice movement, and you get a lot of attention. But it was the female leaders who are the ones who founded the movement, in many instances, in much larger number than the men, and actually helped to build this foundation that we work from. And you see it also because they came out of the civil rights movement. They came out of the Chicano movement. They came out of the AIM movement. All of these various movements that represent so many different people of color. And they brought the lessons that were there. Folks like Hazel Johnson. Hazel Johnson is the mother of the environmental justice movement out of the South Side of Chicago. But Hazel, in her advocacy, she raised up so many people, young people. You had folks like Jean Sindad, one of the most amazing thinkers ever, who was a part of the early environmental justice movement. And all of her lessons came back through her matriarchal line in helping her to become this international leader in these early environmental and civil rights types of things that were going on. You had Dana Alston, who was really the architect of the set of principles, our 17 principles of environmental justice, and helped to pull together that first summit where people came from all across the planet. So when you ask me that question about how important is it, or the connection for making sure that young girls and women have these platforms and opportunities, it plays out when you really understand the history. Because at the same time that they were helping to create this national movement that we now call environmental justice, they were also reaching back and reaching up to young girls and making sure that they had the information that was necessary. And now this second and third, and now we're beginning the fourth generation of young leaders, the majority of them are women and girls. And we just have to understand that when we're willing to make those investments. See, they took their own personal time. They took their own personal resources because folks weren't funding this work at that time, and were willing to make that investment. And we see it also in the civil rights movement and other social justice movements. We see it in the eco-justice movements and a number of other that are going on. So for me, there's no way for us to find a pathway forward. There's no way for us to reach that North Star that I often talk about without making sure that not just that women have an opportunity to participate in the process, but that we are honoring their leadership. I've been blessed to work with and for a number of folks. And there have been no greater leaders that I have worked with that I felt that both had the intelligence and the connection to what was going on the ground than the female leaders who actually embraced me and taught me and guided me on my journey. And I'll call their names out. Dr. Clarice Gaylord, who helped to found the first Office of Environmental Equity, which became the Office of Environmental Justice. She went through hell and back to do that, but she did it with grace, and she did it with intelligence and strategy that most people would pay a couple $100,000 to learn the different types of techniques that she had to use with all these different pressures coming at her. Lisa Jackson. Lisa Jackson was one of the most amazing leaders that I had a chance to work for. Gina McCarthy was another one, but Lisa Jackson, she came from New Orleans. So she understood the dynamics that were going on the ground, and she had a way of bringing people in and also being strong in that, but also making you feel that you are honored and respected, no matter where you are coming from, but at the same time, never, ever losing clarity on what needed to happen in that space. And then I'll just want to call out one other person's name, sort of in the government side of the equation. And that was Gwen Keyes Fleming. She used to be a chief of staff at EPA. And if it wasn't for Gwen, I never would have accepted some of the jobs that I did. She sat down and she broke it down for me. And she also said, Mustafa, I'll be here with you and I will help you to be able to evolve and to grow into this space. And again, that is that mother instinct. Mothers know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. But it's something that for many women, that's internal. And that's why we need more leadership like that in addressing these issues that are going on, whether we're talking about the pandemic or if we're talking about the impacts from the climate crisis or environmental injustices, or in the sets of racial justices issues that are going on. A man feels pain. Let me just talk about this real quick. When we lose a child, a man feels something. His first reaction, of course, is to want to go after whoever did that, right? And I get that. But when a woman loses a child, she loses a part of herself, because she went through and gave life to that child. But she also understands the evolution that needs to happen in that process. About the mourning that happens, but also being focused on life and the continuation of that life. And I see that in many of the leaders, that they actually are not just thinking about the strategy of the moment, but how do I help to preserve life, which is so critically important. I just see so much value that's in that space. And I thank you for asking me that question.
Thank you for offering that. I mean, it was very refreshing. And it brought tears to my eyes because you're talking about the people responsible for giving life, and we're oppressing them and we're holding them back. We're not using the power that they have. And so we're extinguishing life, like all life. It's great and it's wonderful to hear that from a man, because there is a lot of that understanding amongst women. I mean, women know the part they play, and they don't get recognized for it. They don't get credit for it, and they keep marching on and they keep going. They're not encouraged, none of that. But that recognition is really the first step to understanding how much of our destiny of the survival of this world relies upon the destiny and the survival and the thriving of women.
I'm thinking about this connection of the body to the earth. And I'm thinking about how the earth is the giver of life, of sustenance. So in a way, that's a very tangible, kind of understandable reality that exists in the physical world, in a contingent world. But then if you think in terms of like metaphor and allegory, it's also a metaphor for womanhood, for birthing something into existence, And I'm thinking about, when we see people being careless with the environment, right? Careless with life. In a way, it is someone who is inflicting upon themselves a kind of internal and external harm that they're not even aware of when they're doing it most of the time, because there's such a disconnect between the body and the earth, right? Something that was meant and originally created, as far as I can tell, as far as my understanding allows me to perceive, that there's an interdependence there, right? You're engaged in, as a Black man, engaged in this work that you're doing, which historically has been more generally associated with women, because women grow things from the earth. They tend the garden historically, right? How did you wind up in that space particularly, man? What was it that happened to you in your life, or some event that happened that caused you to reflect and say, this is a space that I have a contribution to make, something that was a catalyst for your engagement in that work, man?
I mean, it all goes back to really, really early days. I believe, that there is a divine sort of mission for all of us. Sometimes we just don't want to hear, and sometimes we just don't want to do. And I believe whether you say it's God or the universe or however you want to frame it, that there are two ways of getting to where you're supposed to be. There's the easy way and there's the hard way. The easy way is that you listen,
Right.
and that you move in that direction.
Right.
The hard way is that you got to get knocked over the head a little bit, and you got to get pushed around and all that kind of stuff. And everybody has their own path to walk. For me, as a young boy, I came out of a family of folks who were fighting for workers' rights and civil rights. And my parents, they never told my brothers and sisters or I what we had to do, moving forward. Now, of course, they want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, all that kind of stuff. But what they did say, they said, you got to give back. And so you got to figure it out. And then I just saw a bunch of injustices when I was growing up. I saw people getting sick and I didn't know why. And then later on, I realized that I was growing up in a cancer cluster. We had an old coal-fired power plant across the river, and emissions would blow over. Grew up in a community also that was built on top of an old coal mine. So people used to get their water from a spring. And then we found out later on that it had heavy metals in it. It wasn't like anybody was intentionally trying to poison people, but, all the things from my youth began to come together. I saw things like, walking through the favelas and seeing the injustices that were there. It's like, why don't these folks have running water? Why don't these folks have the right types of sanitation, all these other types of things? So as you begin to see these types of things, and if you're inquisitive, and I was an inquisitive kid, I try to be a good kid, but I was inquisitive, you begin to put it together. And then, I was just lucky that a number of civil rights leaders and social justice leaders began to embrace me when I was younger, and things began to come together. I never thought in a million years, and people laugh about this, and my friends know, I never thought that I would ever work for a federal government, because I was like, I had never seen much value in that. I met all kinds of folks who were working in the early environmental justice movement, and I knew I had found the thing that I could work on for the rest of my life. But to be quite honest with you, when I first started working on these issues, when you're young, you're like, well, you know what? We get this all worked out in like 4 or 5 years. And then
Right.
I think,
keep it pushing.
I think that's a beautiful part of being young. And I think that young people, we're supposed to feel that things are possible, because so much of the work actually rests on the shoulders of us young people. And what would you say? As a millennial, I ask you, what would you say to a population of young people about their role and the importance of their role in what you're fighting for every day?
I would tell them that you have power unless you give it away. You actually have the ability to frame out a new direction. You see it, especially, and I'm so blessed that I get a chance to work with so many young people all across the planet now, because as challenging as the situations are, they still believe and know that they can make change happen. Now, sometimes folks get a little dissuaded because things begin to pile on, but young people are the only way, that real change is going to happen. Now, it's good when it's in an intergenerational way, because we want to honor the wisdom of our elders, and the EJ movement is an intergenerational movement. But if you go back and look throughout history, it is young people who was the catalyst for change. If you go back and look at the civil rights movement, we'll start with the civil rights movement. You will see young people who were sitting at those lunch counters, and the young people who were there marching and taking the licks, along with some elders, but most people were younger people. The civil rights movement, the majority of folks who were there were women and young girls who are also playing a critical role there, even though, once again, it was a number of the men who got the credit. If you go back and we look through the women's suffrage movement, even though when you look at those old black and white pictures, it looked like it was a bunch of older folks, but there was also younger folks who were playing a critical role there. If you look at the divest invest movement, the trillions of dollars that have now been divested, from fossil fuels, that started on college campuses. And those were young people who were a part of that. And if you look at the environmental movement, the modern day environmental movement, if you go back there, that was young people. Black Lives Matter. We can come forward to today. That was what America is really supposed to look like. That was young Black kids and white kids and Latinx kids and indigenous kids and LGBTQIA, all that energy coming together to finally feel like the words that this country is founded on could become real for everyone. And that is that enthusiasm and innovation and ingenuity that young people bring. Yeah. And young people will also play an incredible role in the technology that's so necessary. Many of the things that we use now, that was young people who created that. You know, young people are so critically needed in this moment. And I would say, even on those challenging days, and trust me, I've had a few of those over my time, that you have the ability to build real partnerships. You have the ability to transform what this country looks like, to show folks that we should not be judging people on the color of their skin, like Dr. King said, but really on the content of their character. And that character means that you see people through a different lens, and you understand the value that they bring through a different lens.
Man, you know, it's interesting because, you know, we're having this, you know, this talk, and young people, the younger generation keeps coming to the fore of the conversation. And I'm thinking about, man, for cats who haven't made their contribution yet, right? But perhaps they have an impulse within themselves to make a contribution, right? So I'm thinking about, you know, maybe if, say that I'm one of those people, right? And I'm thinking about, man, I want to get involved, I want to get engaged. I have a passion for perhaps wanting to get involved in the environmental justice movement, right? But I'm not really sure if, you know, if I have what it takes to make a contribution, or if I can do it, man. I mean, how would you talk to somebody who was doubting themselves, doubting their ability to make change, to contribute? How would you speak to that?
In any capacity,
exactly.
Making any change, even within their own lives, yes. Let alone big movements.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I would tell them that we need you. Everybody wants to feel needed. And to know that it's authentic. And the next thing is, what's your gift? What's your blessing? And as soon as somebody tells me what their blessing is, that thing that really moves them, then we can find a way for that to not just be utilized, but for you to grow that exponentially to help to make change happen. You know, I've worked with all kinds of folks. I work with folks that lots of times people ignore, right? You know, a lot of times folks don't want to work with gang members. I'm like, or folks don't want to work with folks, you know, sitting on the corner, you know, who moving product and all this other kind of stuff. And it's because we don't ever slow down and talk to folks that they feel like this is the only thing that there is for me, that I'm not a part of change. Everybody has a gift. You know, if you can put lyrics together, you can help to move the planet because you can create a song or a poem. Or if you're a great writer, you know, you can share stuff in a way that will touch someone. You know, if you're great with numbers, you know, we need economists, we need mathematicians, we need folks who are going to be able to think about putting together these sets of processes that are going to be a part of new tools, you know. So it doesn't matter what your gift is, you know. You might be somebody who's great with kids, and you'll be able to find a way to translate things and to make sure the kids feel safe and secure. And when they feel safe and secure, they flourish. It doesn't matter. You just have to be willing to actually embrace whatever it is that God has given you. And that will be translated into some miraculous things. I've seen it time and time again. You tell a young man that he's needed, and serious about it, you watch how it change. You tell a young lady that she's needed and that she's going to be honored and valued, it'll be transformational with what you see will happen. And they will take it, and they will grow it, and they'll make it even better.
Yeah, you know, it's fascinating. It speaks to a lot of my area of study, which is in the area of youth empowerment. And I studied for a while on why young people are radicalized into extremist groups, into gangs, into, you know, ISIS was the focus of my study at the time. But whatever principle that applies to the radicalization of ISIS applies to the radicalization of any of these groups. And what we found is exactly what you're talking about, that if we don't give youth a place to channel their energy, and we don't give them a channel, we don't give them a sense of belonging, we don't tell them you're needed here, another group will. And they will go there. youth need to go where they are needed because they have an energy that needs to be expelled. And it will lead to either positive transformation or it will lead to the negative destruction, basically, of the community environment. You know, it's interesting for me as well. I was thinking about when I was about 13, that's when my activism started. And I didn't care what people thought. I was just doing until I opened myself up to this world and I was told, well, you're just a child and you don't know anything. And so, you know, I kept quiet again. But then later on, you grow a little older and you start sitting around the table with people that are supposed to be experts and people that are supposed to be the learned researchers. And then you realize nobody really knows what they're doing. Nobody really knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it made me feel how important it is that insecurity that we have, either insecurity that is coming from your age, insecurity that stems from your background, your culture, the color of your skin, your gender, it's an illusion.
My grandmother said that no one person has all the answers.
Yeah.
But then when you're willing to bring a number of people into the circle, you will be able to then see this growth that will happen that will allow us to find a pathway forward. That's why, you know, this moment is so critically important and to see in our country and across the planet if we are truly going to evolve into our own humanity. That's why I appreciate the work of Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign, which also comes out of Dr. King's movement. And that even comes from older movements where folks said, you know what? Yes, we sometimes have some distinct things as Black folks or brown folks or Asian and Pacific Islander folks or indigenous folks, but we also got a whole bunch of commonalities, both on the sets of impacts that are happening and the sets of opportunities that are there, and we need to come together and stop allowing folks to pimp us. I mean, I don't know how else to say it because it really is a pimping of people. And when we do that, and when we understand, as my grandmother said, no one person has all of the answers, but when we all come together in the circle, then we can figure this out together. And when we figure it out together, then we have this unity. And when you have that unity, people can't break it. I remember as a small boy sitting at my grandfather's knee. Now, my grandfather was one of those folks that everybody respected because that's the way he carried himself. And he used to have an old bushel of apples. So he used to grow, he worked in the coal mines, but he also grew his own everything. And he would keep this bushel of apples and he would peel apples and men from all across the counties would come and sit on his porch. And he would cut little pieces of the apple off and feed it to me. So I would sit there and listen. And what he was really doing was he was fighting around civil rights and workers' rights, but at the same time, he was making sure that everyone who came, and you got to remember at that time, you know, driving from county to county, you know, it took a little bit to do that, you know, that through unity, they could make sure that they got a better set of opportunities, whether if you're working in the coal mine or wherever it was. And those lessons are the ones that show us the pathway forward. Our elders, you know, in many instances, had many of the answers that we need. There's always some new ones that need to come into the mix and new ways sometimes of doing stuff. But the foundational pieces are there for us. And I remember seeing men of different colors and then eventually women also began to work in that space. And so that's a part of my learning of the value of everybody coming into the circle.
You know, he's talking a lot about unity and this process of consultation and the importance of it. When people come to the table and they put their idea out, we don't have to have unity of thought in the sense that not all of our thoughts are, I mean, actually it shouldn't be, or we should be bringing different thoughts to the table and contributing it. People think that if you don't agree with somebody, you can't progressively move forward. But it's not like that. You know, you bring a thought to the table, you agree to take a certain action. You take that action, maybe you discuss about whether that action was good or there needs to be, there's limitations to it, and then you come back to the table again, and then you brainstorm again, and then you work together. But you all support that this is the direction we're gonna take, and then once we take it, let's reevaluate again. And that's the importance of that consultation, which has been a pivotal part, I know, of your life and my life as well. Yeah. Consultation in all matters and the part that unity has to play in that diversity of thought. And I think it's such a beautiful point you bring up.
Yeah, it's a kind of communal learning, which I think Brother Mustafa is kind of pointing to, is this notion that everybody has a part to play in this process. And when we bring all those learnings that we've acquired in the field of service.
Yes.
And we evaluate, look, what's worked, what hasn't worked. That was really wonderful what we did over there. I like the results that we got it at. Yeah, that other thing on the other side, that wasn't so good. We'll try something different the next time. It's interesting because as you're sharing what you're sharing, Nava, what you're sharing, Brother Mustafa, I'm thinking about how the environment has so many lessons to teach us about interrelationships, man. When we are walking through a field of grass, every blade of grass has a part to play in supporting whatever is walking upon it. How the soil sustains the grass, how the rain that falls, feeds the soil, which gives birth to the grass, gives rise to the grass, and how from the lowest blade of grass to the mightiest oak tree in the forest, both of those are interdependent. They all have a part to play. And so, reflecting on that, it's like, if I can apply what I observe in the natural environment, this interdependence, man, this sense of oneness in my relationships and the way that I interact and work with others, man, that's a powerful force to unleash in the world, man. And we talk about getting things done and making progressive change. I mean, I believe, as you said, man, in spirit and God, and I believe that God has given us this incredible mechanism for learning. All we got to do is open ourselves up to observe, listen, and learn, man. And it's right there,
Oh, I agree with you 1,000%. Everything is connected. I mean, literally everything on this planet is connected. And when we break the chain, that's when we see things start to fall apart. When you look at racial injustice, when we saw what was going on with the police, right? It connects all of us. It connects us on a spiritual level when we don't get engaged in the fight for that, to get it right. It engages us on a physical level. It engages us on an economic level. It engages us on a mental level, because there are impacts that happen when we're not making sure that we are inserting ourselves into positive change. Remember when Dr. King said, it's not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That is about our interconnectedness. And when we begin to embrace that and say, you know what? We're going to invite everybody into the circle. And we're also going to make sure that we are understanding that this could very easily be me.
Yeah.
That really speaks to our interconnectedness.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I totally agree. And the more we talk to people and activists in the field that are serving, the more we connect all of these issues to a lack of this sense of this recognition of our oneness. It's that complete apathy that is at the root of all of these injustices and these problems.
Yeah, and it's deep because the other side of that I don't think we think enough about, we focus justifiably so on those who are victimized, whether they be women, whether they be black folk, black and brown folk. But really one of the parts of that we don't look at enough of is the profound self-hate that the person who is perpetuating the violence and the injustice has. And that is because that's the source material of all of that in humanity, is a profound self-hate. Man, I mean, this stuff ain't easy. I mean, and it requires a lot of you, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, all of those facets of your being have to be engaged in order to make your best contribution. And man, I'm wondering, what do you do, man, to sustain, my brother? There are a few things that I can guess, but I want you to speak to that. Where are you turning for that source of inspiration, brother, that replenishment, that thing that keeps you nourished and allows you to refill yourself so you have something to give?
Well, I'm trying to get better at that. I'm trying to grow and get stronger in so many aspects. But that's one that I need to focus on even more. I get strength from the whispers of my ancestors and those who I met along the journey, and seeing their commitment. So it keeps pushing me on, but they also continue to share with me that I have to take better care of myself. And that's a deeper conversation about that part. But I get it through music. I get it through poetry. I get it through running. I've been a runner, for as long as I can remember, and being able to actually breathe in when I'm running It also reminds me when I hit certain places when I'm running and there's more pollution in the air of why I do the work that I do. Nature is a great way for me to actually recharge.
Yeah.
And then I get recharged also by being around amazing people who say, Mustafa, you don't have to do it all. And that's about that circle again.
Yes.
I keep bringing my grandmother back, but it is about that circle, because inside of that circle also is that you don't have to carry all this.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
you don't have to carry the trauma. You don't have to carry the solutions. We're going to do this together.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this is such a transformational moment, because there's so many people who are waking up and who are getting engaged. It also energizes me, and it also allows me to say, you know what? Instead of working 20 hours a day, I can work 18 hours a day. What I really need to do is get down to something normal. But each and every time that I work with somebody new, or I see somebody, you know, who was just getting in it a few years ago, or growing and getting stronger and wiser, I'm like, it's almost like when I'm running, I can like exhale, and I'm like, it's gonna be okay. Every time I hear a new artist, you know, who is thoughtful, who begins to integrate stuff into the way that they move and the way that they do things, I exhale, because I'm like, they got it. When I see these new politicians, you know, who don't look like politicians because they move like folks who, you know, who we work with, you know, who are saying, you know what, I'm gonna go and sleep on the stairs of the Capitol to make sure that folks understand that everybody deserves housing and that people shouldn't get kicked out of their housing. Or, you know what, I'm gonna go and be with folks, you know, who are fighting for healthcare, or who are fighting for a cleaner environment, or who are doing this or doing that, and actually showing up, not showing up when the cameras are taking the picture, but they showing up just like you and I show up when we do it, just because we know that it is what we're supposed to do. And it's what also feels right. That gives me energy. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna be all right as long as we keep pushing and keep moving.
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
You know, you hit a interesting point when you said people are waking up. What does waking up look like to you? Because I know that we don't really understand sometimes that when we're waking up, it's actually a painful process. When you've been asleep for so long and you're waking up, and then you're waking up then to your ownership of things and the fact that you need to do something about it. You have a part to play. It's a very painful process. Can you speak to that a little bit, and maybe even touch on some of the pains that you're experiencing right now in this?
Yeah, you know, for me, waking up is when white brothers and sisters are not just saying the right things, but they're also putting the mirror up and saying, it's not just about, you know, X, Y, and Z over there. I got to take a hard look at myself and some of the choices and actions that I've done. So I got to check myself on that. You know, it is about men not wanting to control women's bodies, and understanding that women can make the right decisions for themselves. They don't need your intervention to try and control folks. The waking up is not just stopping at, man, I messed up. It is about the hard work of all the things that I have to do to educate myself, to change the way that I move and the way that I talk, and the number of different things that are a part of that. There are people who are in a lot of pain. There are people who are dealing with all kinds of traumas. We have to give grace, but inside of that grace means that there's also responsibility for helping people to get what they need to become whole. I've seen folks who come out of, you know, these racist organizations and right-wing types of situations, you know, really far out there folks. And there have been people who've been able to transform and heal because they wanted to. And somebody just had to be able to reach out to them. So I have so much respect for folks who work in that space of helping people, you know, in their darkest moment, you know, to be able to find the light. And that's what this is all about.
That's
us helping people find the light, us helping people to be in a better and safer space, and us honoring folks. And that's my mission, and I hope it's other people's as well.
you're bringing up a memory for me, man. Recently, I was in St. Croix, man, doing some research because my family goes back generations in St. Croix. I find myself driving up this narrow road up to get to this place called Estate Mount Washington, which is a plantation, an old sugar plantation in the hills of St. Croix, near Frederickstead, right? And I'm passing iguanas and all this stuff and deer in the road. I said, man, where the heck am I going? So I finally get to this place, man, and absolutely beautiful in terms of the natural surroundings. I mean, the foliage, the diversity of animal life. Get out, park the car, get out of the car. And as I'm getting out of the car, I notice in the middle of all of this incredible beauty, there was a sugar processing facility. And then I looked up the hill, and up the hill there was this huge house, and there was a plate on the house that said Great House, built 1751. And so in the midst of coming up and being awe-inspired by all of the beauty that I saw driving up there, I am immediately struck by the conflation of beauty and terror, and how those two realities coexist in that space, right? And so I'm wrestling with the feelings, and I'm thinking about the ancestors who worked in this plantation, right? And who lost their limbs processing the cane stalk through that mechanism, through that apparatus. And we were talking earlier about, man, the connection of the body to the land. So I'm standing in this intersection of trauma and tremendous beauty, looking out over the ocean, envisioning a life, what the future holds, right? That we can create where that trauma we don't forget, we remember, right? We wrestle with it, we learn the lessons, and then we chart a path forward, right? That makes space for all of us, everybody on the planet, to work together for a better tomorrow and a better future for us. And I'm thinking about you, man. And as you're standing on a hilltop somewhere and you're looking out over the ocean and you're thinking about the future, brother, what's the end goal, man? What's the vista look like for you, man? Where are you trying to get to, brother?
People honoring each other, people refusing to be silent about injustices. I would love for folks to understand that we as a people, right, on this planet or in this country, are in it together. And if we're truly in it together, then we have to have authentic relationships, right? I often talk about authentic collaborative partnerships. So I hope that, one day in the spirit form, or when I'm an old man with one lock that's white, I hope that I'll be able to look out and see that we have transformed. Because I fear that if we don't, which I believe that we will, that if we don't, that, existence on this planet will not be what it could have been. I'm an optimist. Some people tease me about being an optimist. I'm a realistic optimist. I truly believe that we will get there. How many generations it will take for us to do it, I'm not sure. But I know that we have to continue the work now, and it has to exponentially grow, because there will be more pandemics, especially if we don't. There will be more racial injustice if we don't. There will be more economic injustice if we don't. And there will be more climate crises if we don't. But if we do, we can change many of those dynamics. And that means the policy has to change. That means that the way that we invest has to change. And that means that we have to change.
Yeah, man, I love that, brother. Well, I wholly believe in the power and the beauty of the vision that you have for the future. It's very similar to the vision that I have, and also I know the same vision that Nava shares as well. And I feel honored, brother, to be on this path, walking towards that vision, knowing that there are co-laborers in the field, brother, doing the work, such as yourself, such as my incredible co-host Nava, and all these people who are making these profound commitments to social justice and transformation. So I just want to say I honor you, brother, the path that you have trodden.
Thank you.
Love you for the work that you're doing, the commitment and the spirit that you're bringing to the work, brother. And we are just so honored to be able to lift you up in this space, man, and to spend just a little bit of time getting to know you and to learn about your journey. So thank you, brother.
Thank you for sharing your light with us. It was really an honor.
Incredible.
Well, thank each and every one of you also. I mean, the media plays such an incredible role. Your platform is so amazingly important because you get to help to feed people. You get to help to feed their intellect. And there are some who are feeding folks things that are not too good for the mind, body, or soul.
This is true.
I appreciate you.
You got it, but next time we see each other, man, I'm gonna have my tie game on, so just be ready. I'm gonna bring it, brother. All right,
Thank you, Mustafa.
Take care, brother.
Thank you.
Peace and blessings, man.
Bye-bye.
Take care, brother. All right, man.
Y'all stay blessed.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Peace.